All right. So I think I'm recording now. So welcome everyone to our webinar in this series on generative AI and statistics. This is a webinar that's been organized by the StatsUp AI Alliance. And so for some people who maybe don't know that much about the StatsUp AI Alliance, this is a relatively new kind of group that aims to organize activities to empower statisticians to participate more actively in AI research and leadership. And so it's been recognized as an ASA interest group for the last little while. Um, the website, you can find out more information on the website, including how to kind of join the Google group and things like this. And so we post our recordings of all the webinars on our YouTube channel. And the group is also involved in organizing a conference. This is our first conference this summer. So that's up AIX 2026, so statistics and trustworthy AI for cross-domain acceleration. And so the link is here at the bottom. Early bird registration ends on June 1st. So this conference is at the end of July in Boston. So if you're interested, you can find out more about the group and the conference there. And so we're very fortunate to have Dr. Naim Rashid presenting today. So he's an Associate Professor of Biostatistics at UNC School of Global Public Health, and his research group develops statistical and machine learning methods for precision oncology. And he's involved in a lot of kind of advisory roles in statistics, associate director of the Annals of Applied Statistics and directing biostatistics core groups at UNC. And so he's going to talk about some of his work in kind of collaborating AI use in statistical research, training, and practice. So Naim, it's all yours. So I think Naim has got about a 40-minute talk, and then we'll be able to open the floor up to kind of discussion after that too. Um,
That's great. Thank you, Owen, for that introduction. And thanks to you and Tien for inviting me to speak. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about some of our experiences in using generative AI in our research group and with the hopes of having some guidelines or techniques that can be useful for others as we try to figure out how to navigate using AI as it's been changing so quickly. All right, let's see if I can get over the first hurdle. All right, can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the title of my talk is Staying in the Driver's Seat, Calibrating AI Use in Statistical Research, Training, and Practice. And the goal of this talk is to hit each one of those particular topics and figuring out where is the line it should be drawn when it comes to how much or how little we should be using AI in each case, and what is the pros and cons of its use in various contexts. All right, so let's start with framing the problem. What's the worry in terms of using AI too much or too little? And is actually a new problem in terms of what we've faced in the past? So I'll start with an example. If you start with this example regarding a new employee that starts at a company, perhaps that company has their employees use AI tools or has a license to use a commonly used one. It's you can imagine that individual would be using AI to build tools and also to examine the output and review every line of code to propose a analysis or a new strategy to senior leadership. And during the leadership meeting, someone may ask, well, why didn't you consider this other approach? And so it might be in certain cases that employee might be caught off guard because they've invested a lot of time in terms of implementing and critiquing a plan that AI gave, but they may not have perhaps thought about critiquing the premise or the framing of the question in the first place. And so the problem that I want to show here is not that AI was used incorrectly, but actually the judgment that we use to evaluate questions and plans and approaches that may be suggested by AI wasn't actually scrutinized in the first place. Now, I'll talk a little bit more on the next couple slides of what I mean by that. But the core tension here that we're trying to address is that AI is not just wrong sometimes, but it's also potentially good enough to the point where it might quietly substitute for the judgment that we would otherwise be building and using. And so in this talk, I'm not arguing to use AI less. It's more to try to use AI in a way that keeps judgment in the loop and that we keep exercising our own judgment over the work that it produces. So in the absence of judgment, then the main risk here is that the work that's being produced stops being ours and is one that is being created primarily by AI with not as much oversight as should be used. So what I'm not saying in this talk is that I'm not saying that, these productivity gains that we get from AI are just some sort of smoke show. I'm also not saying that trainees also have to learn the same way that we did when faculty, for example, were going through their own training as graduate students many years ago. And I'm also not stating that there is an inherent trade-off between speed and quality of learning when trying to use AI. But in some cases, if you use it properly, I'll define what that means later, that you can actually learn faster and more deeply, depending on how you integrate AI into the learning and teaching process itself. So the claim that we're going to make here in this talk is that some of the forms of speed that AI helps you gain can also remove the struggle that helps build judgment during the learning process and during the course of implementing an analysis or through a project. And so the question is, well, which ones are the ones that we should focus on here? So a lot of us have been grappling with this question on how do we deal with AI in teaching, in our courses, in training our students in our own day-to-day lives and research. And the good news is that going through the literature, this isn't the first time that we've had technology disrupt the way in which society tackles certain tasks. And that there's been a lot of evidence from prior tool shifts that can help inform us what we could do or should do in this time of great change when with AI being used in all different sectors of society, including statistical research. So a couple of examples from the past. I think some of you guys may remember using calculators or the pre-calculator era, in schools. And so the use of the calculator then sort of trumped the need to do mental arithmetic all the time. Uh, some of you guys might also remember when GPSs became commonplace for driving. And there was some worry that people would lose the ability to remember which way to navigate and where to go, and they would just blindly follow a GPS all the time. So there's some worry about the loss of spatial memory. When Google became popular, the need to simply memorize large amounts of details became slightly reduced because we had the entire internet at our fingertips and we can Google anything whenever we needed to answer a question. So now in this current iteration, when we're talking about generative AI, the question is, well, what is that thing that we potentially could lose or that could weaken when we start to see Gen AI be used in more and more context? And so that question might be in relation to judgment. And in a recent survey, it was found that higher confidence, in the output from generative AI was associated with less self-reported critical thinking, and also was associated with higher task self-confidence with more use. So it's this problem that we're seeing of this unease that some of us are having regarding this quick pace of change with the incorporation of generative AI into daily life is a reflection of the same anxieties that have happened before. What's different here is that the problem that's being affected, in this case, I'm arguing is that it's the judgment that we hold over the choices we make in our research and other aspects. That's the thing that is different this time, whereas prior tools addressed other issues. So there was an interesting paper published back in 1983 where it was mainly focused on the and examining the impact of automation in industry and some of the potential losses that might occur in human abilities as more and more things became automated. And it was somewhat prescient in terms of how we may look at the impacts of AI use today. So one of the things that was discussed in this manuscript was the degradation in skills that happen as AI takes over tasks and automates them that humans used to do. And so there's less potential ability for humans to practice doing those particular skills as other tools take them over. Another is also the training paradox, where we treat people to follow certain instructions or to do things a certain way. And then, as automation comes into play of those particular instructions or tools, then the actual thing that's most important in that context is the ability for these individuals to provide judgment and oversight over the tools that are automating these tasks. And these aren't really the same skills. This is something that also some of you may have been experiencing as you try to review output from AI tools. It becomes more and more difficult to monitor and to quality check output from AI tools, especially if you're using it a lot and there's a lot of output being generated. And so having the sustained attention to try to catch issues and to look for potential problems in the output from these automated tools becomes a primary job and becomes a difficult task to do continuously. And lastly is the transparency cost. We need to be able to oversee these tools that are automating processes for us, and we need to be able to see them in a way that we can transparently follow what's being done and the choices that are being made potentially under the hood so that we can intervene when necessary to make changes. And so when there's opaqueness in this process, it becomes a lot harder for us to know really what's going on during these automated processes, and that could lead to potential problems later. So these aren't problems that will disappear by themselves, but these are things that we can try to anticipate and help us design new ways to do things so that we can try to mitigate some of the impact of these approaches that have been spoken about before in prior shifts when it comes to automation. All right. So there's also a quieter cost here, and this is something that those of you who use AI tools now extensively may have also seen. Um, there's a couple of concerns that have been largely discussed and talked about in statistics and more broadly, and the fact that sometimes LLMs can generate fake citations or information, and we also don't get measures of uncertainty or other sorts of assessments when it comes to evaluating LLMs. And lastly, we've talked a lot of times about how some citations that are being made, by large language models can be fabricated and could look plausible even though they're incorrect. So we're not going to talk about, this particular aspect. I think this is already well known. The quieter risks that I want to talk about today is regards to what happens and what risks may exist for the day-to-day work that we do in our research. For example, some papers may be written with AI or methods or analyses may be written with AI. It might be harder to verify the rigor of this work when they look plausible. In addition, when we train our doctoral students, they may not be using that judgment or building that judgment or intuition as a skill if they rely too heavily on AI during the learning process. And lastly, for students who are doing coursework, the misuse of AI or to lean too heavily in AI can also affect statistical literacy as they try to really build these formative concepts in their minds as they're exposed to ideas in the first time. So I'll expand on each one of these aspects and to talk a little bit about how we can calibrate the use of AI in each of these cases to potentially help us use these tools in a way that will help us to continue learning and to keep judgment in the loop. Okay. So, there's a part of every project that you can't really outsource. And if you do outsource it to someone else, or to an AI tool, then the work becomes less yours. And as a result, there might be things that may occur during the project that you may not be aware of. And so, this problem with outsourcing, this question about outsourcing, can span problems that we try to deal with in research, in our doctoral student training, and also, the students that we teach. So, for example, in the case of our own research, there's a chain of judgments that you can construct here when it comes to how we may arrive at a problem and then how we can choose to solve it and present the work. And so, if you look at these five different general stages of the research process, you can imagine that at every single individual stage, that AI can help us, for example, frame the question. They can help us evaluate different methods and also verify output, so on and so forth. But the judgment, though, about what to choose and what to do at each stage should remain yours and not outsourced to an AI tool. That's where the work is remains yours, and that the choices that are made remain yours and not something that is also being automated. And so this is something that you may have heard about in other cases as well. But some recent work has shown that, commercial large language models, when they're writing code, they tend to cite or reference non-existent packages 5.2% of the time, whereas open source models had a higher error rate. And so just being able to look at output and see if it's plausible, is one thing. But these types of issues can result in errors and problems downstream, if you don't exercise your judgment in being able to catch issues like this during the research process itself. Another way you can think about this is that specifically in statistics, there's a lot of different examples that we could come up with that show how things that look, okay can actually be plausibly wrong. And while the AI tool itself may be suggesting something that looks like it's correct, it's actually may not be addressing the question at hand here. And that failure can be traced to not deciding or not placing your own human judgment on what the tool should be doing. So, for example, we can have large language models create code for us to do, let's say, linear regression. And if when during the process of doing this, the human should specify specifically what estimand the question that needs to be answered requires. Otherwise, if you let the tool try to guess that for itself, it can derive a plausibly correct model, but it may be answering the wrong question if it picked the wrong estimand in the first place. Another situation is with imputation. The choice of the missingness mechanism is very important in this setting. And again, outsourcing the choice of whether something should be imputed, assuming MCAR or MAR or MNAR, is a very big part of this process where a lot of human judgment is needed. And so if you outsource that, you may be imputing things that understates the uncertainty in the downstream inference if the model predicts wrong. So the point here is that inserting and exercising judgment over all decisions that are made during the research process is something that is really important for us, even if you are using AI tools to accelerate each individual part of that process. When it comes to doctoral training, we are dealing with a different scenario where you have students who are learning and learning to code and learning to do research. And so while AI tools can help accelerate a lot of the things that used to be very time consuming from before, like lit search and writing code and things like that, there's certain things that shouldn't be outsourced that's related to that productive struggle. And so there's some prior work that talks about how there's certain conditions of learning that can help improve performance on certain tasks very quickly. In this case, using AI tools to answer a question. These can oftentimes fail to support long-term retention and transfer. So while some of these tools are can lead to quicker gains in terms of being able to solve certain problems or answer certain questions, they may not actually help the student improve and when they deal with problems in the future and when they need to troubleshoot certain things. Part of that struggle and trying to figure that out, I argue, is something that helps to strengthen the student and enhance their abilities to be able to deal with similar problems in the future. There are other ways that we can sort of characterize this sort of effort that helps distinguish between learning that's quick but forgotten and learning that's difficult but lasts longer. For example, varying the conditions of practice, showing how something works across different contexts. AI can sometimes just focus on one when talking about a solution. In addition, the spacing over time, where students may practice doing something over a course of, let's say, weeks, as opposed to cramming or getting an instant answer, that can be affected here if you're using AI tools to just give you an instant response. Mixing topics can also be helpful in terms of interleaving different concepts and preserving retention, and using exams and tests as study events, which forces students to retrieve and generate instead of just passively reading. And so when you get an instant answer from an AI tool, neither of those two things happen. So using AI as is during the learning process can bypass all four of these different ways of learning that can help maintain long-term retention. And so it's really important to try to be specific about each one during the learning process. In the classroom environment, one of the key things that we need to focus on here is the first time when a student encounters a concept, and because that's really the most influential point where a student really builds that internal schema or intuition about a particular topic. And so, this particular aspect of concept formation, it's something that is the most contextual. It depends on what was taught in the classroom, the students that it was taught with, what happened over the course of a semester, the choices that were made during the teaching process, and as a result, this is something that is the hardest to automate for that reason. And so the statistical literacy of our students really is dependent on how we choose to frame this first encounter with a topic. And so this particular process then should be something that's designed and not something that is defaulted, for example, to AI. So, for example, if a student or a course, allows something like a generic AI tool to just introduce a concept and giving answers, there's a risk that the internal schema and the intuition that a student builds may not be correct even before an instructor ever sees it. So being able to rely less on AI as a default for explaining things, at least at the very beginning or the first time that a student is learning a concept is really important because it's that time point that really helps to shape that first encounter, I mean, that really helps to shape, how a student learns or retains and builds an internal intuition on a certain topic. Okay, so in summary, what AI is really good with is with execution of specific predefined tasks, providing options, drafting, implementing things. But when it comes to what stays ours during this whole process, what I'm arguing is that it's the accountability for the choices that are made, explaining why those choices were made, and also explaining the results and what they mean in the broader context. So while AI can be useful to do a lot of these tasks on the left, we still need to provide our oversight for the higher level choices that are made to really make sure that the work is ours and that we are still responsible for it and that we haven't outsourced everything to an AI tool. Okay. So this line in terms of what AI, should be relegated to doing versus what stays ours, this line itself is not fixed. It's something that also can move over time with respect to what stage we are in our career, what task we are trying to do, and I'll try to delineate, how to draw that line in these different contexts next, and also give you a useful takeaway in terms of being able to try to determine that for new problems as well. So let's stop here and let's do a quick poll here to answer this question to see where everybody else, is at regarding these concerns about AI and its use in, research, training and teaching. If you want to go ahead and participate, you can either go directly to this address here, or you can scan the QR code with your phone camera, and you'll be taken directly to the poll that you see on this page. So the results here are going to be live. So I'll give this about a minute for the numbers to trickle in. Again, you can scan the QR code here if you want to be able to go and take the poll. So just give it another minute, and then we'll move on from here. And by exposed, I mean in terms of your susceptibility to the potential downsides that we talked about when it comes to some of the risks of using too much AI or over delegation to AI in each of the areas I mentioned. Great. So we seem to be converging a bit, and it seems like a lot of people are concerned here about research rigor, followed by teaching and trainee mentoring, and followed by option D here. I think that this is a reflection of what faculty and students are worrying about. I mean, you've heard a lot in the news about citations being made up and entire papers being written by AI, and I think everyone, as they're trying to navigate this space, especially in research and teaching, how do you where to draw the line, I think has been a common question that keeps coming up. So thank you to all those that participated, and I'll try to tailor the rest of the talk to sort of reflect, these interests. All right, so we talked about how exercising that judgment, that oversight, is an important part of this process when it comes to research and or training and teaching. So how exactly do we do that? And so I'm going to give five concrete practices that you guys can take away. And I'll mention that at the end of this talk, I'll have a slide that gives you a link to a repo that has all of this on there so that you can navigate there after the talk and you can pull from the repo or just explore it on the web and to find these practices and examples and other things from this talk there as well. Okay, so the first suggestion is to read everything that ships. Now, this sounds like it's something that is obvious, but as you're using AI tools to, for example, generate code, there can be voluminous amounts of code that you might have to review. So to maintain responsibility and ownership and understanding of what the tool is doing, it's really important to review every line of code, to question every design choice, so that you're treating the AI tool as like a junior developer so that everything that it does and that it's written at least gets your eyes on it at some point before you commit your code, let's say, to your repo. And so this means questioning assumptions, questioning the approaches used. Are there particular things you could have written on your own? And this also extends to things that may happen in other contexts. For example, if you're using AI to draft, some writing, set up a simulation framework, if you're setting up a rubric or a lecture, it's really important that you read everything that ships and you question, um, the assumptions made by the tool as to why they did what they did when they outputted the result. And a good, place to draw the line is if you're reading something, it doesn't really make sense. It's really important to stop, question it, and then if there's a concept that's missing or something that you don't understand, it's good to stop and learn it before you accept it and push it. Okay, that's basically another way of exercising judgment and using our judgment during this process. We have AI generate the things that are time consuming for us and that are a little mundane or rote or tedious, but we still have to stop and question things in terms of the choices it made. The second is to do a pre-prompt pause. So the ability to just stop before you even use an AI tool and just answer the following questions either on a sheet of paper or like in a text file, and just ask yourself, what am I trying to accomplish? What's the best way do I think is to do this? What are potential pitfalls or tricky things about what I'm planning to do that we need to account for? And then the last part is, well, how do I know if the my goal in the first place has been achieved? And what am I expecting to see? And how will I verify it? So in some ways, like how would you benchmark the quality of the result? And so when you do that, you can use this plan as part of your prompt as additional context. And when you run your prompt, you can compare the output from the AI tool compared to what you wrote out in advance. And it's the difference between what the AI output and what you wrote, where you can learn a little bit about what the tool missed, what you could have done differently, what else could be done, etc. So a perfect example here is I wanted to do a power analysis for a study. And so if I wanted to follow this approach from the prior slide, I would write that my goal is to do a sample size calculation for a confirmatory study. I want to use, let's say, the t-test as my basis for this power calculation. And the one thing that I think may be difficult here or tricky is that the pilot data that we're basing some of our effect sizes off of may be small, and the effect may be slightly exaggerated. And I want to account for, other values as well. So let's say that you went ahead and you prompted your AI tool, and it gives you this output. So this output here will tell you the answer to your literal question, how should I, do this power analysis? But the thing that was revealed here is that it didn't exactly address this tricky question here. And so following up with additional questions that talk more about what this output missed was a way for me to learn and expand in terms of what other things could be done in order to address these additional concerns that I outlined in advance that may not have been output at the first iteration of using this tool. And so instead, I left with an additional sensitivity analysis that helped span the range of uncertainty when it came to this assumed effect size for the study that was also forming the basis of my power calculation here. So being able to compare what you wrote up beforehand and then running your AI tool and comparing the output is a great way to sort of compare and contrast different approaches and ask for more follow-up questions. All right. The third thing is to write a decisions log because for those of you who've coded a lot, clearly when you've worked on a project for a long time, even just an analysis, not necessarily a software project, you've made a lot of choices over, let's say, the course of months. And sometimes it's hard to keep track of what you did and what day and why. And so in this case, when you're using AI to help automate some parts of that project, it's just as important to record these choices and why you made those choices in, let's say, a file that you can call the decision.md document or some other document, so that you can record, what choices you've made over time. And these could also be referred back to by your AI tool so that it can know where you're at, where you have been, and where you're planning to go. The entire aspect of writing your decisions also forces you to understand the decisions that you're making on that date and why you made them in the first place. And it also makes it more transparent for you, for others in the future to look over what was done and chosen, and also can give some context to the AI tool that you're using as well in the future. So this doesn't have to just be specific to code. This can also be something that is pertaining to just general projects, manuscripts. The goal is to have your own project map and not just blindly use one that's put out by AI. The fourth one is the explain it back test. And basically, the goal is to try to see if you can explain back your implementation without assistance. And if you get stuck during that process, those places where you have gaps are those places where you need to spend more time on to go back and understand what was done. Because again, ownership here and responsibility over what's done is tied into your judgment and understanding of what's being implemented. If you outsource all of that to the point where you can't explain what you did, then there's going to be a lot of potential downstream problems and risks that may come from that. And the last thing here is to do what's called a red team analysis to your work. So before you accept an output from an AI tool, you might want to try to argue against it. For example, asking the tool, what estimand did you actually answer here? What diagnostic would make me distrust this? So on and so forth. These are things that you could try to pretend as being questions from a hostile reviewer. And so it's a way to challenge what the analysis did and to critically take apart the assumptions and the choices that were made so that you can have a more deeper understanding of why things were done the way that they were done. And again, each of these examples are on this resources repo that I'm going to show at the end of this talk if you want to spend more time to go through each one of these. So the main thing that ties all these different suggestions together is that it implements what I call deliberate friction, meaning that rather than just taking output verbatim from an AI tool, it makes you stop and slow down to understand and to critique what's being done, so that you can assert more judgment and oversight over and understanding over the work that's being created. And so it's that friction that really helps to build understanding and to help with learning, and to try to prevent this erasure of understanding and learning that unrestricted AI use can sometimes lead to. All right, so getting towards the question on, well, we talked about where to draw the line. That line can be different depending on what role you're in or what you're trying to do or what stage you're in your career. And so for educators and for team leads, some of the things, for example, that can be useful would be examples like the two-pass assignment, to try it first without AI and then iterate with AI after that, and then to submit both with some sort of thoughtful reflection, on what they learned during the process. I've heard of some professors having students give oral explanations in class of what they did or to answer a question so that they can check that the understanding is there for that student and not being outsourced to something else. Deliberately breaking code or giving output or fictitious output from an AI tool that is deliberately wrong. That can help mimic those situations where there's a hidden bug or error or something that a student should be learning to detect in day-to-day work. These tools can be useful to try to keep individuals on their toes to be aware of potential gaps in assumptions or issues that are being generated. And the last aspect is to try to institute a review culture. So giving more scrutiny on AI generated work, and asking, folks to walk through others in terms of what's being done. So to check their understanding is something that's very important. And the way in which you incorporate AI in learning is really important. There was a paper that came out in PNAS last year where they took high school students and they randomized them to three groups. The first is a group where they just use AI in whatever way they would normally use it. The second way is to use a tuned AI tool that rather than giving you the answer to your prompt, it would walk you through step by step to check your questioning and to give hints, as opposed to just giving you the answer right away. And the last group didn't have any sort of AI use. So what they found in this study is that during the practice sessions, students did better with AI, used it better than those who didn't have it. But in the post-test assessment where AI wasn't allowed, those students who used the vanilla GPT actually did worse than those who didn't have any access to it at all. And in contrast, for students that actually use this tutor prompted GPT, where they asked guided questions and gave hints instead of answers right away, again, they did better during practice than the no AI group. But when they entered the post-test section of the study, where no AI was allowed, they didn't do actually as badly as the group that had the Gen AI use. So the main takeaway here is it's not that AI use itself is bad for learning. It's the way in which you use AI that can really change outcomes in what students retain and what they learn. So having a tool that just gives you the answer, right away versus one that guides you through the process of how one may answer a particular question, can make a big difference in terms of what students retain and how well they do in assessments later on. And then for doctoral training, it's a similar idea. There's some struggles that AI can help alleviate, and there's some that can be counterproductive when it comes to learning. And the ability to design and choose what things you should have your students do manually without AI is should be those things that are places where you need that understanding, that intuition to be built. So, for example, asking students to try to do derivations and debugging without AI first to try to build their skills can be one way to help build that sort of toolkit internally before turning to AI. And if your student is using AI for their dissertation, asking questions like, Show me a place where AI helped, talk to me about a suggestion you rejected and one thing you verified independently. Again, trying to more directly engage them and how they use AI in their research. And then most importantly to me, the ability to defend that decision without any other assistance or using AI tools or just saying, AI said so. I think that's one of the biggest parts of this learning process and also maintaining ownership over your work. If you can't explain what you did and why, then there really is no way that you could say to yourself, well, this is my work because you didn't have ownership over it in the first place. Now, for your own research, this was something that folks seem to be very concerned about in this audience. Um, there's a lot of places where you can understand where intuition judgment really has to be maintained in this process. So again, having a decisions.md file for your projects can be really helpful and useful. And having times where you don't use AI at all, again, can help you reset and to explore things in a different way than when you were using AI. And most importantly, to have times where you try to force yourself to explain it back to you or to others what you've done before, let's say, committing code or before you teach them or submit a paper, again, is really important just to ensure that your understanding is in sync with what's being done and that you will be less likely to be surprised later, let's say, when you get your paper back or when you get questions during class. So if I had to break down, things to delegate and things not to delegate, there's a couple things I could say in general where to draw the line in terms of AI use versus otherwise. Boilerplate text, code scaffolding, syntax, format conversions, just brainstorming. That's usually safe to offload to AI to do very low level tasks that don't take a lot of human judgment. Um, on the other side, things that you want to stay strictly hands-on about, for example, higher level things regarding architecture and design, methodological choices, and etc. These are examples of things that do require a lot of human judgment and input, and you don't want to relinquish that to an AI tool. And in the middle here are things that are kind of in the gray zone, things like how to set up your analysis code, how to set up, let's say, the methods section of your draft. You could probably do this with like some back and forth of hands-on and delegation for writing. But in general, there's definitely a spectrum of things where it's more clear cut in terms of what's safe to delegate to AI and things that are less safe to do so. And so while I propose these as like a general draft, the things that are in each column can shift based on what you're doing, the stakes, and also where you're at in your career. And I'll get to that in a little bit. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip this slide. I'm going to come, you guys will have access to these slides later. So you can come back to it later if you're interested. But just to get to the main point here, when it comes to deciding between what should exist in what column and how much involvement you should have. In general, I think for things that spanning different contexts, career stage, and stakes, how much you should stay hands-on really depends, on each of those three aspects. So, for example, the first time you might encounter a concept during in the classroom, right? You want to stay hands-on and not outsource that to AI, whether you're the teacher or the student choosing what method to use in your research project, and in training, trying to maintain that productive struggle rather than farming everything out to AI as a trainee. These are things where you should try to be more hands-on. If you're an early researcher, it might be better to try to do more things from scratch to help build your judgment and intuition. And in cases where you are trying to do things that are highly regulated, like publish a clinical trial, and you want to publish a manuscript, you want to be more hands-on in those cases. And in situations where you're just doing some exploratory work or formatting, or if you're a senior researcher where you've already had this pre-built intuition from years of experience in a certain area, perhaps you can be more hands-off in those situations. And if you're only doing, scratch work and coming up with drafts, it might be okay to use more AI in those cases because the stakes are lower. So, depending on these three aspects and what is relevant to your particular task or problem, you might choose to lean more towards delegating less or to delegating more to AI, and as I said, that line can shift based on each one of these three aspects. Okay. So again, the other part of this is that it's not just drawing the line. It's noting that this line can change depending on situation, and also to make it transparent to others as to where you drew the line, so that they can understand, how much you may have been involved in writing a manuscript or doing an analysis, so that they know how much work they may have to put into in terms of reviewing something that comes out of that process. So if you take anything away from this talk, I think that the question you can ask yourself if you're unsure of where to draw the line is the following. Can you still answer the fundamental questions about your own work? If somebody asks you, why did you choose this versus that, or what does this mean, and you can't answer those questions, you're definitely delegating too much to AI. And you need to try to use a different approach to try to dial back and to try to reclaim more ownership over your project. So when you can answer questions like these, this is when you're still in the driver's seat of your project and you still maintain ownership. So in the regulatory, context, having an AI use disclosure, is something that is really important here. Having your decision log alongside your statistical analysis process, and also having, the sponsors, red team your analysis as well, and having all those different choices and details, transparent for review, I think is also beneficial in this case as well. Okay, so these are some questions that you can ask either, as an advisor or researcher, or as an early career faculty or trainee. And you can go through this list and you can ask yourself these questions one by one. And the point is that if you answer no to any of these questions, then the next slide can talk a little bit about some of the things you could do as a place to start to address some of those issues. For example, starting a decisions.md file, write your own approach before you use a prompt, and some of the other techniques we talked about. And you can try to adopt one or more of these and to try to do more, until you feel like you've gotten a handle on what to do next. Okay, so in summary, when people started using GPSs, it didn't make them more terrible at driving. It just made them, know less about where they might be. But people who use GPSs, where they would look at the map, occasionally while they're driving, and paid attention to where they were going, they were still able to learn directions and where to go and how possibly to navigate without the GPS when they didn't have it with them. So it's not just about yet this tool is going to be bad if you use it too much. It's knowing how to integrate that tool in a way that helps you continue learning and to also allow you to reap the benefits of that automation. So that's it for my talk. And if you have questions, feel free to email me. I'm going to have a post on LinkedIn after this. If you want to give me a follow, you can comment and to post your own questions and thoughts and to keep the conversation going. And if you want to have access to some of the bibliography here and resources that I talked about, just you can either go to this link here, or you can just scan the QR code to take you to the website that includes this handout PDF that I made for my students originally when we started doing AI related work in my research lab, and to have access to some of the templates that I talked about for things like the decisions.md file and other aspects. So feel free to give that a scan if that's something you want to look into after the talk. That's it for me. I'm happy to take questions and to keep the discussion going. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Naim. Really interesting talk. Yeah, so we have time for questions. If people want to ask questions, you can either post them in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself or raise a hand. Either we can, whatever works.
Yeah, I will ask a question. Thank you, Nam, for this wonderful presentation. It's, not only you share practice, you also share your principles. That's very helpful. As advisor, I think you touch upon both the education and research, but let me just focus on the advisor part.
Mhm.
I feel but yeah, I definitely have contributed to increasing productivity. But in the past, we only need to worry about mentoring students for their skill acquisition. Um, in your experience, do you feel now you need to worry about their skill acquisition, but also the mid skill acquisition, like like it's sort of the mentoring becomes almost you're competing with another invisible mentor, and then that sometimes when I think about scaling that model, maybe for research training courses that involve more students, it tend to be um, tend to be hard to scale. Like we want to students to remain in the driver's seat, but they constantly being lured towards not. Right. So what's
Right.
your thought about the scaling aspect of ensuring rigor?
That's a really good question, and I think it has great ties to this general question and problem that we've seen in science and more broadly about misinformation. And I don't want to say that, AI tools always put out, wrong facts or misinformation, quite the opposite. But I do believe I've seen situations, for example, I was in a committee meeting for another student, and that was in another department. And they were talking about this really complicated model that wasn't really presented at the prior committee meeting. And it seemed like to me that they just used AI to farm out and do this entire model analysis and implementation. But when I started to ask them questions about, what is this? What does it do? What is that? Then they weren't able to answer the question clearly. And that's a clear example of taking things verbatim from a tool and not really understanding what the whys and the whats behind the choices that they made. When it comes to learning, I think that it's important, like I mentioned in the talk, that the first times that they interact with a topic, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's within doctoral research, that they do it in a way that is manual as opposed to having AI give it to them. Because it's really that time frame where you build your intuition, and there's a real risk of learning something that misses the nuances that's important for a particular topic. I've seen cases where AI tools suggest, a particular approach to solve a problem, but it misses a lot of the specific conditions where it may not work, or it may actually make things worse. And so it's that lack of nuance sometimes that I think it makes it risky to outsource to AI, some of this learning process. So scalability is one point, but we want to make sure we build strong learners. And I think it's important that we still maintain, some hands-on process when it comes to the introduction and learning of new topics. That's a good question. I see something in the chat. How do you protect students from over-reliance on AI and skill degradation, and when they over delegate their work to AI tools? I think the couple of the checklists that I mentioned before, like the explain it back test, the ability to show someone what you did and why, if when questioned, the debugging exercises where things are purposely broken, or the ability to detect errors in output. These are all great ways to check your understanding. And the goal here is again to maintain ownership not only over your work, but also over your knowledge. And so the ability to explain things and explain topics when you're learning something new for the first time, I think is a great way to check yourself in terms of when you might be doing too much. Because there'll always be a scenario where you're not going to have a computer or a phone with you and someone is asking you questions, just like in that introductory example of the new employee at the company. Somebody asked him, "Why didn't you do this?" And that was something that was never considered by that individual. They just took the output verbatim. So I think it's important to continue to check yourself in terms of your understanding to make sure that you really can answer the questions that are important. I hope that helps.
So I have a follow-up question on that. You mentioned at one point kind of spending time every week where you work without AI. And I think you mentioned 90 minutes. I was curious how you got to that 90-minute number and general
I
advice
just
on things like this. Yeah.
it's better than 60, less than 120.
Yeah.
I'm there's no law in terms of like how long you should do something, but I think the main point is to try to have some deliberate non-AI time to think for yourself. And you don't want, it's very easy to get wrapped up in, some of the tools that are available to us now, where they could write entire analysis plans for us. And I think it's good to take a break from that, to step back, to get some perspective, and to reorient if you need to, if you're finding that you're not able to really stay on top of, the work that you're doing and understanding it.
Yeah, I want to add a comment here. I think mentoring in the age of AI is not so much different from our typical mentoring. The research group setting
Yes.
here can be really, really useful. Like
Yep.
the 10 minutes before the research group meeting or the 10 minutes after research group meeting can be such a humble setting for discussing really concrete wins and then failures of AI users. I tend to be very open about my excitement about certain functionality I discovered, and also at the same time, like tease about how sometimes AI produces really silly and then mistakes, and that tend to bring out some interesting observation from my student as well.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree. And, also like to take the analogy of like a research group, in some ways, like as if you are someone who leads a group, you yourself are not always doing the day-to-day analysis, right? That you have people, students who are doing a lot of that work, and you're giving expertise and guidance, to them, even though you might not be completely hands-on. And in some way, I don't know if I want to make an exact analogy, but when it comes to, using AI tools, it's slightly different, but there is sort of an oversight role that still needs to be in place, right? To have responsibility over something means having oversight, giving direction, and to give feedback. And I think it's kind of, in some ways, things that you may do in leading your teams or your research groups may also apply to how you manage your use of AI and what it spits out.
Any other questions for Naim? Well, if there's no more questions, I think we're coming right up on the hour, so perfectly timed. Um, yeah, thanks again for an excellent talk. And as I mentioned at the start, there's going to be further webinars in this series. They'll be posted on the Stats Up AI website and the conference link, which I think Tien posted in the chat at the start too, if you're interested in attending the conference. The registration link is in the chat now.
Great. Thanks for having me.